The governess listened to the Duke's command, and her soft defiance changed everything that night, and the detailed information provided. The corridor flickered with lamplight that seemed reluctant to settle. Clara Hartwell stood at the threshold of the Duke's study, her hands folded before her, composed as always, though the summons had come past the hour of propriety. The long case clock in the passage marked 10:30, with a steady, accusatory tick. "Miss Hartwell," came the voice from within, low, precise, and edged with authority that did not invite question. "Enter, if you please." She did not please, but she entered. His Grace, Julian Vane, Duke of Ashmere, stood with his back to the fire, silhouetted in a manner that made disagreement seem architecturally impossible. The room smelled of leather, ink, and something faintly bitter, perhaps old smoke, perhaps older grief. "You sent for me, Your Grace." Her voice was calm, clear. She did not curtsy. Not from disrespect, but because the moment felt less like a social call and more like a sentencing. He turned. The firelight caught the hollow beneath his cheekbone, the shadow of sleeplessness he wore like a second waistcoat. "I did. There is a matter requiring immediate resolution." Clara's fingers tightened imperceptibly at the seam of her cuff. Immediate. Night. Resolution. The words aligned themselves into a shape she did not yet trust. "I am at your service, Your Grace." His gaze flickered briefly, as if he had expected something softer, something more pliable. "Miss Bright has been insubordinate." Clara's breath stilled. Elsie, the child who hid pressed flowers in her primer, who asked questions no one else dared voice, who had begun to trust that this house might be safe. "Insubordinate, Your Grace?" She refused to recite her evening prayers in the presence of Lady Honoria. She claimed— He paused, his jaw tightening. "She claimed that prayers spoken under compulsion are no prayers at all." The clock ticked. Once, twice. Clara felt the weight of what was being asked before it was spoken aloud. She did not move. "Lady Honoria believes," the Duke continued, his tone clipped, formal, "that the child requires correction, immediate, visible, and administered by you, Miss Hartwell, in her presence, so that the household may witness discipline restored." There it was. The command, not a request, not a consultation. A directive delivered with the full weight of rank, wrapped in the language of household order. Clara looked at him, not with defiance, not with submission, but with something that made the Duke's hand move unconsciously to the back of his chair, as if he needed steadying. "Your Grace," she said quietly, "I do not believe Miss Bright was insubordinate." The fire crackled. The clock judged. "You question my assessment, Miss Hartwell?" "I question what was asked of her." Clara's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "A child who speaks her conscience is not insubordinate. She is awake." His eyes darkened. "Lady Honoria is the Dowager Duchess of this house. Her authority does not extend," Clara interrupted, gently, devastatingly, "to the conscience of a child entrusted to my care." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of shock, of something close to admiration, and of danger. Julian Vane had been contradicted by ministers, by stewards, by men of rank and title, but never like this, never with such quiet, unyielding grace. "You refuse." It was not quite a question. "I will speak with Miss Bright privately. I will address any genuine fault with fairness, but I will not perform cruelty for an audience, Your Grace, not even at your command." The Duke's hand pressed against the signet ring on his finger, once, twice, as if the gold could anchor him. He had summoned her expecting obedience. He had received something far more unsettling. Truth. "Do you understand?" he said slowly, his voice low and edged with warning. "What you risk." Clara met his gaze. Her grey-green eyes were steady, unblinking. "I understand, Your Grace, that I risk my position, my reference, my livelihood." She paused, and the pause was everything. "But I will not risk my soul." The clock ticked on, indifferent to the ruin being contemplated. Outside the study door, unseen, a shadow shifted, a rustle of pearl-grey silk, the faint scent of lavender and judgment. Lady Honoria had been listening, and she had heard enough. Morning arrived with fog that clung to the windows like an accusation. Clara descended the servants' staircase with her lesson books pressed against her ribs, her hair coiled tightly, her expression composed. She had not slept. Sleep required the luxury of certainty, and she possessed none. The schoolroom door stood ajar. Inside, Elsie Bright sat at her small oak desk, her honey-brown hair falling unevenly from its ribbon, her fingers tracing the margin of a hymnal with deliberate care. "Miss Hartwell," the child said without turning. "I heard the clock last night. You were summoned late." Clara closed the door softly. "You should not listen at doors, Elsie." "I did not listen. I heard." The distinction mattered to the child. "Was it about me?" Clara set the books down and knelt beside the desk so that their eyes were level. "It was, and it is resolved." Elsie's gaze sharpened. "Too sharp for 8 years. Too old for innocence." "Did you defend me?" "I defended what was right." "That is not the same thing." Clara almost smiled. Almost. "No, it is better." But Elsie did not smile. She looked at Clara with the gravity of someone who had learned too young that safety was conditional. "They will dismiss you, perhaps." "Then I have cost you everything." Clara reached out and gently straightened the ribbon in Elsie's hair, not as correction, but as care. "You have cost me nothing, child. You reminded me what I am meant to protect." Footsteps approached in the corridor, measured, deliberate. Clara rose and turned just as the door opened. Lady Honoria Vane entered without knocking. She never knocked. Authority, in her philosophy, did not require permission. "Miss Hartwell." The dowager's voice was silk over stone. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough, my lady." "How remarkable." Lady Honoria's gaze moved to Elsie, then back to Clara, assessing, calculating. "One might think a woman in your position would find rest difficult." Clara did not rise to the bait. "Conscience, my lady, is a surprisingly gentle pillow." The dowager's mouth tightened, just slightly, but enough. "Indeed, and yet I wonder whether your conscience will prove so comfortable when your reference is required." There it was. The threat, spoken with perfect propriety, delivered with a smile that did not reach the eyes. "I have always trusted," Clara replied evenly, "that the truth requires no embellishment." "Truth," Lady Honoria repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it distasteful. "How quaint. But truth, Miss Hartwell, is a luxury afforded to those who do not depend upon the goodwill of their betters." Elsie's hand tightened on the edge of her desk. Clara placed a steadying hand on the child's shoulder, silent, firm. "Goodwill," Clara said quietly, "is not the same as justice, my lady." Lady Honoria's expression shifted, just a fraction, but it was enough to reveal the steel beneath the pearls. "You would do well to remember your place." "I remember it perfectly, my lady. It is here, with this child, teaching her what honor requires." The dowager turned sharply, her grey silk catching the pale morning light like a warning. At the door she paused. "His Grace will see reason, Miss Hartwell. He always does. And when he does, you will find that soft defiance is a poor shield against reality." She left. The door closed. The fog pressed closer against the glass. Elsie looked up at Clara, her voice small. "What will you do?" Clara returned to the desk and opened the primer. "I will teach you your lessons, and I will trust that what is right will prevail. And if it does not?" Clara met the child's gaze with steady calm. "Then I will know I chose rightly, regardless." But even as she spoke, she wondered, privately, silently, whether dignity would be enough when the household turned, when whispers became certainty, when the Duke's authority reasserted itself as it must. She did not know that at that very moment in the study below, Julian Vane stood before the fire with his hand pressed to his signet ring, staring at the candle snuffer on his desk, the same one used each night to extinguish light, to enforce silence, to end what must not continue. And for the first time in years he wondered whether he had been using it wrongly all along. The household moved through the day with the precision of clockwork and the tension of drawn wire. Clara conducted lessons with Elsie as always. Grammar, arithmetic, a cautious exploration of poetry that felt, under present circumstances, almost rebellious. At 2:30, the vicar arrived for tea. Reverend Alcott was a man of middling years and unsettling perception, the sort who asked after souls with the same attention others gave to weather. Lady Honoria received him in the drawing-room with Clara summoned, ostensibly to discuss Elsie's progress in Scripture. It was, of course, an ambush dressed in civility. "Miss Hartwell," the vicar began, his tone genial, his eyes watchful, "Lady Honoria speaks highly of your dedication to Miss Bright's education." Clara inclined her head. "I am grateful for her ladyship's confidence." "And yet," Lady Honoria interjected smoothly, "there are concerns regarding the child's spiritual formation." The vicar's gaze sharpened. "Concerns, my lady? Miss Bright has displayed a troubling tendency toward independence of thought." The dowager paused, letting the phrase settle like sediment. "She questions. She resists instruction. And Miss Hartwell, I fear, has not provided the firm guidance such tendencies require." Clara felt the trap closing. To defend Elsie too passionately would confirm the accusation. To remain silent would concede it. Miss Bright, Clara said carefully, possesses a keen and honest mind. I have endeavoured to cultivate discernment, not blind compliance. Discernment, Lady Honoria repeated, her tone laced with acid sweetness. How modern. The vicar set down his teacup with deliberate care. Miss Hartwell, do you believe a child should obey her elders without question? I believe, Clara replied, her voice steady, that a child should learn to distinguish between authority that protects and authority that merely demands. The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Lady Honoria smiled, thinly, victoriously. You see, Reverend, this is precisely the philosophy I feared. One cannot teach virtue by encouraging rebellion. I teach virtue, Clara said quietly, by refusing to call cruelty obedience. The vicar's expression shifted, something like surprise, something like respect. Strong words, Miss Hartwell. They are the only words I possess, sir. Before Lady Honoria could respond, the drawing-room door opened. His Grace the Duke of Ashmere entered without announcement, an irregularity that silenced the room immediately. Reverend Alcott. Julian's voice was controlled, formal. Lady Honoria, Miss Hartwell. The vicar rose. Your Grace, we were discussing Miss Bright's progress. I am aware. The Duke's gaze moved to Clara, and for a brief, unguarded moment, something flickered in his expression. Doubt, perhaps, or recognition. Miss Hartwell, a word, privately. Lady Honoria's jaw tightened. Your Grace, surely, now if you please. It was not a request. Clara rose, her heart steady despite the certain knowledge that this moment would define everything that followed. She followed the Duke into the corridor, where the long case clock ticked its relentless judgment. He stopped near the window where fog still pressed against the glass. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, you have made an enemy of Lady Honoria. I did not seek to make an enemy, Your Grace. I sought only to protect a child. Protecting a child, he said slowly, and defying the Dowager Duchess are, in this house, the same act. Then this house, Clara replied, her voice quiet but unyielding, has confused protection with subjugation. His hand moved to his signet ring, pressed, released. You do not make this easy, Miss Hartwell. I do not mean to make it easy, Your Grace. I mean to make it right. Julian turned to face her fully. The fog light softened the severity of his features, revealed the exhaustion beneath the authority. You risk everything for principle. Yes. Why? Clara met his gaze without flinching. Because, Your Grace, some things cannot be compromised. Not for employment, not for safety, not even for you. The clock ticked, the fog pressed, and in that corridor something shifted, fragile, dangerous, inevitable. Julian's voice, when he spoke again, was quieter. What would you have me do? It was the first time he had asked. Clara had not expected the question. Men of rank did not ask. They decreed. Yet here stood the Duke of Ashmere, fog light upon his shoulders, waiting for her answer as if it mattered. What would I have you do, Your Grace? She repeated his words slowly, weighing each syllable. I would have you see Miss Bright as she is, not as an inconvenience to be managed, but as a soul entrusted to our care. Our care. His tone carried something between challenge and curiosity. Yes, Your Grace. A child does not belong to any one person. She belongs to the household's collective conscience. Clara paused, her fingers brushing the seam of her cuff, that small gesture of gathered resolve. And if this household's conscience permits cruelty in the name of order, then the fault lies not with the child, but with those who govern. Julian's hand stilled upon his ring. You speak as though you have authority here, Miss Hartwell. I speak as though authority, Your Grace, is earned through justice, not merely inherited through title. The words hung between them like a verdict. Clara braced herself for dismissal, for the cold withdrawal of ducal favour. Instead, the Duke did something unexpected. He turned toward the window and pressed his palm against the cold glass, as if testing whether the fog was real or merely his own obscured vision. My late wife, he said quietly, his voice stripped of formality, believed that kindness was weakness, that children required discipline without sentiment, that a household run on affection would collapse into chaos. He did not look at Clara. I permitted her philosophy to govern, even after— He stopped. The unspoken word death settled between them like frost. Clara waited. The clock ticked its steady accusation. Lady Honoria, the Duke continued, his breath fogging the glass, believes she honours my late wife's memory by continuing that philosophy. She sees softness as betrayal, and I— His voice faltered. I have been too cowardly to contradict her. Clara stepped forward, not close enough to breach propriety, but close enough to be heard without raising her voice. Cowardice, Your Grace, would be maintaining cruelty to avoid discomfort. What you have done is grieve. They are not the same. He turned then, his dark hazel eyes searching her face as if looking for absolution he did not believe he deserved. And yet grief is no excuse for injustice. No, Your Grace, it is not. A floorboard creaked in the passage beyond. Subtle, deliberate. Someone was listening. Clara did not need to see Lady Honoria to know her presence. The air itself seemed to chill with judgment. Julian heard it too. His expression hardened, reassembling the ducal mask. But when he spoke, his words were not the retreat Clara feared. Miss Hartwell, you will continue Miss Bright's education without interference. If Lady Honoria raises objection, direct her to me. Clara's breath caught. Your Grace, that is my command. He emphasized the final word with deliberate irony, a faint echo of their first confrontation. Will you obey it? Something flickered in Clara's eyes. Not triumph, but relief tempered by caution. I will, Your Grace. Gratefully. Do not mistake this for sentiment, Miss Hartwell. I am not a man of sentiment. But even as he spoke, his gaze betrayed him, softened at the edges, uncertain. Of course not, Your Grace. You are dismissed. Clara curtsied, properly this time, because the gesture now carried respect rather than mere obligation. She turned toward the servants' staircase, her heart beating with cautious hope. Behind her, Julian remained at the window, watching her reflection fade into the corridor's dimness. When she was gone, he reached for the candle snuffer on the nearby table, lifted it, felt its tarnished weight, and set it down again without extinguishing anything. In the drawing room, Lady Honoria rose from her chair with slow, deliberate grace. The vicar had departed, but his presence lingered in the air like incense. She moved to the doorway and observed the Duke's silhouette through the half-open door. Julian, she said, her voice carrying the authority of a woman who had governed this house for decades, we must speak. He did not turn. Must we, Aunt? You are making a grave error. Am I? That woman has bewitched you with rhetoric. She trades in defiance and calls it principle. Perhaps, Julian replied, his tone flat. It is principle. And perhaps we have traded in control and called it care. Lady Honoria's expression tightened. Your late wife would be appalled. My late wife, Julian said, finally turning to face her, is dead, and I am left to govern the living. The words fell like stones into still water. Lady Honoria's face drained of colour, though her composure held. You would dishonour her memory for a governess? I would honour the truth, Aunt, wherever it leads. Lady Honoria regarded him for a long, measured moment. Then she smiled, thin, cold, calculated. Very well, Julian. But know this. Truth is a luxury the world does not afford to those who depend upon reputation, and that woman's reputation, I assure you, is more fragile than you imagine. She swept from the room, pearl-grey silk whispering threats Clara could not yet hear. Upstairs in the schoolroom, Elsie Bright sat with her hymnal open, though her eyes were fixed on the door. When Clara entered, the child looked up with an expression too grave for childhood. Did he dismiss you? No, Elsie, he did not. Then what? Clara closed the door and sat beside the child, her voice steady. He chose what was right, over what was easy. Elsie's small hand reached for Clara's. Will Lady Honoria allow that? Clara squeezed the child's fingers gently. I do not know, but we shall face whatever comes with dignity. Outside, the fog thickened. The clock struck 3, and in the kitchens below, servants exchanged glances that carried the weight of gossip, not yet spoken, but inevitable as nightfall. By evening, the household knew. Servants always knew. They knew before the gentry had finished their sentences, before letters were sealed, before decisions hardened into consequence. The knowledge moved through the corridors like smoke, subtle, pervasive, impossible to contain. Mrs. Pembroke, the housekeeper, brought Clara's supper tray to the schoolroom personally, a gesture both kind and weighted. She set it down without meeting Clara's eyes. Thank you, Mrs. Pembroke. The housekeeper paused at the door, her hands folded before her apron. Miss Hartwell, if I may— Yes? Mrs. Pembroke's voice dropped to a whisper. Her ladyship has written to the Collingwood family. They're seeking a governess for their daughters. Clara's stomach tightened. The Collingwoods, a respectable household, well connected, the sort of reference that could secure or destroy a future. I see. She has also, Mrs. Pembroke continued, her discomfort evident, suggested to the household staff that Miss Bright's— difficulties stem from improper influence. Improper influence. Clara repeated the phrase as if examining a specimen under glass. Meaning? Meaning, miss, that whispers are being planted. About late-night meetings, about conversations held in corridors, about a governess who forgets her station. Mrs. Pembroke's expression was pained. I do not believe them, miss. But belief is not what matters when reputation is at stake. Clara set down her teacup with careful precision. Thank you for the warning, Mrs. Pembroke. The housekeeper nodded and departed, leaving Clara alone with the implications. Lady Honoria was not merely threatening dismissal, she was orchestrating ruin. A governess dismissed without reference could find no respectable position. A governess dismissed with whispers of impropriety attached could find no position at all. Clara rose and moved to the window. Below, in the garden obscured by dusk and fog, she could see the Duke walking alone among the empty flower beds, his hands clasped behind his back, his head bowed as if in prayer or penance. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Hartwell? Elsie's voice, small and worried, came through the connecting door to the child's bedchamber. May I come in? Of course, dear. Elsie entered in her nightdress, her honey-brown hair unbound, her face pale. I heard Mrs. Pembroke speaking to cook. They said Lady Honoria is trying to send you away. Clara guided the child to the chair beside the fire and knelt before her. Elsie, you must not worry yourself with household matters. But I am the cause. The child's voice trembled. If I had simply recited the prayers... No. Clara's tone was firm but gentle. You are not the cause, child. You spoke your conscience. That is never wrong. But now you will suffer for it. Clara took Elsie's hands in her own. Listen to me carefully. There are times in life when we must choose between safety and integrity. I have chosen integrity. Whatever comes of that choice is mine to bear, not yours. But what if they send you away? What if I never see you again? Clara's throat tightened, but her voice remained steady. Then you will remember that someone once believed your conscience mattered more than their comfort, and you will carry that forward. Elsie's eyes filled with tears. I do not want to remember. I want you to stay. I know, darling, I know. They sat in silence, the fire crackling its small defiance against the November cold. Outside, the fog pressed closer, and the house settled into its evening rhythms. Doors closing, lamps extinguishing, the long case clock measuring time with relentless impartiality. At 8:30, a footman arrived with a sealed note. Clara recognized the Duke's hand immediately, firm, precise, oddly beautiful. Miss Hartwell, you will join me in the library at 9 o'clock. This is not a request I make lightly, nor one I offer explanation for until we speak. I ask only that you trust my intentions are honorable, however they may appear. J. Vane Ashmere. Clara read the note twice, her heart beating an unsteady rhythm. A private meeting. At night, with Lady Honoria already whispering accusations. It was precisely the sort of impropriety that could seal her fate, and yet the Duke had asked her to trust. She folded the note carefully and placed it in her pocket. Then she returned to Elsie's bedside, tucked the child in with quiet reassurances, and descended the servants' staircase as the clock struck the quarter hour. The library stood at the house's western corner, its tall windows facing the garden and the mist beyond. Clara paused outside the door, her hand upon the brass handle, her breath measured. She knocked. Enter. The library was warmer than the corridor, lit by a single branch of candles that threw uncertain light across leather spines and mahogany shelves. The Duke stood before the fireplace, his posture less rigid than usual, as if exhaustion had finally claimed some small territory from his formidable self-control. Miss Hartwell, he gestured to a chair near the hearth. Please, sit. Clara remained standing. Your Grace, propriety suggests, he interrupted quietly, that I should dismiss you tomorrow morning with no reference and no recourse. Propriety suggests I should yield to Lady Honoria's wisdom and restore order through submission. He met her gaze directly. I find I am weary of propriety's suggestions. Clara moved to the chair but did not sit. Your Grace, if this meeting is discovered, the door remains open. He indicated the corridor beyond, where lamplight glowed faintly. Mrs. Pembroke has been informed of your presence. This is a consultation regarding Miss Bright's welfare, nothing more. And will that distinction matter when whispers become accusations? No, Julian admitted. It will not. But I have learned today, Miss Hartwell, that some things must be risked regardless of cost. He paused, his fingers unconsciously seeking his signet ring. You asked what I would do. I am attempting to answer. Clara sat then, her hands folded in her lap, her expression attentive but guarded. The Duke did not sit. He paced. 3 steps toward the window, 3 steps back, a caged restlessness that spoke of decisions half-made and certainties crumbling. "I have been considering," he began, "Miss Bright's future and my own failures in securing it. Your Grace, let me finish, if you please." His tone was not harsh, merely determined. "The child has no family beyond this household, no parents to advocate for her welfare, no relations to provide alternative shelter should this house become—" He hesitated, searching for the word. "Inhospitable." Clara's heart tightened. "You fear Lady Honoria will make the house unbearable for her. I fear Lady Honoria will succeed in removing you, and once you are gone, Elsie will be left without defense. Then keep me, Your Grace." The words emerged more forcefully than Clara intended. "Do not yield to intimidation." Julian stopped pacing and turned to face her fully. "Do you believe it is so simple?" "No, Your Grace, I believe it is precisely that difficult." Clara rose, propriety forgotten in the urgency of the moment. "But difficulty is not the same as impossibility. You have authority here, use it." "Authority," he repeated, and something in his voice carried the weight of long doubt. "My late wife taught me that authority without cruelty is weakness. Lady Honoria has reinforced that lesson for 3 years, and His jaw tightened. "I have permitted it because grief made me a coward." "You are not a coward, Your Grace." "Am I not?" His gaze was unflinching, brutal in its self-assessment. "I have hidden behind propriety and protocol rather than face the truth that this house has become a place where kindness is suspect and conscience is punished." Clara took a step forward, closing the distance between them to something that bordered on dangerous intimacy, though her expression remained composed, her voice steady. "Then change it, Your Grace. Not tomorrow, not eventually. Tonight." "How?" The question was raw, unguarded. "Lady Honoria controls the household accounts, the staff appointments, the social calendar. She has made herself indispensable." "She is not indispensable," Clara replied firmly. "She is merely accustomed to obedience." "There is a difference." Julian's hand moved to the mantelpiece, gripping its edge as if physical anchor could steady moral vertigo. "If I defy her openly, she will retaliate. Against you, against Elsie, against anyone who challenges her authority. Then let her retaliate, Your Grace, but do not reward her cruelty with capitulation. You ask me to risk everything." "No." Clara's voice softened, though her conviction remained absolute. "I ask you to risk comfort." Security is not the same as complicity. The candles flickered. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, obscuring the garden, the world, everything beyond this room and this moment. Julian turned toward the desk, where the brass candle snuffer rested, tarnished, practical, a tool of endings. He lifted it, felt its weight in his palm. "My wife used this," he said quietly, "to signal when conversations were finished, when the children were to be silent, when the household was to remember its place." He set it down with deliberate care. "I have used it the same way, to extinguish, to control." Clara watched him, understanding dawning. "And now, Your Grace?" "Now," Julian said, his voice gaining strength, "I believe some lights should not be extinguished, regardless of who finds them inconvenient." Before Clara could respond, footsteps approached in the corridor, measured, deliberate, unmistakable. Lady Honoria appeared in the doorway, her pearl-grey silk catching the candlelight like armor. "Julian," she said, her tone perfectly controlled, perfectly cold, "I trust you have concluded your consultation." The Duke straightened. "I have not." Lady Honoria's gaze moved to Clara, then back to her nephew. "It is nearly 10 o'clock. Surely any discussion regarding the child's welfare could wait until morning." "It could," Julian agreed, "but it will not." The air itself seemed to tighten. Clara felt the moment's fragility, sensed the confrontation building like pressure before a storm. Lady Honoria stepped into the room uninvited. "You forget yourself, Julian." "No, Aunt. For the first time in 3 years, I remember myself." Lady Honoria's expression remained perfectly composed, though her eyes betrayed something sharper, calculation mingled with affront. "You remember yourself," she repeated, her tone measured. "How remarkable. And what precisely have you remembered, Julian?" The Duke did not retreat from her gaze. "That this house belongs to me, that decisions regarding its governance are mine to make, and that your counsel, while valued, is not absolute." The clock in the passage struck 10, each chime a small verdict. Clara remained motionless near the hearth, aware that her presence made this confrontation more dangerous, yet unwilling to abandon the Duke to fight alone what she had begun. "I see." Lady Honoria's voice carried the chill of winter stone. "And Miss Hartwell has no doubt assisted in this awakening of memory." "Miss Hartwell," Julian replied evenly, "has reminded me of principles I once held, before grief made me forget them." "Principles?" The Dowager pronounced the word as if it were faintly distasteful. "How convenient that these principles align so perfectly with the desires of a woman whose position depends entirely upon your favor." Clara's hands tightened in her lap, but her voice remained steady. "My lady, I desire nothing beyond what justice requires." "Justice," Lady Honoria echoed, her smile thin and cold. "The last refuge of those who mistake insolence for virtue." She turned her attention fully to Clara, her gaze dissecting. "Tell me, Miss Hartwell, do you believe yourself qualified to instruct a duke regarding household governance?" "I believe, my lady, that truth is not contingent upon rank." "How democratical of you." The Dowager's tone dripped with disdain. "And yet the world, the real world, not the imaginary one you inhabit, operates according to order, station, propriety. Without these structures, society collapses into chaos." "Without justice," Clara countered quietly, "society collapses into tyranny dressed as order." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Julian watched the exchange with something between fascination and alarm, as if witnessing a collision he could not prevent. Lady Honoria's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough. "You dare speak to me of tyranny, you who possess nothing but the charity of this house? Who would be dismissed tomorrow without reference if I— Aunt—" Julian's voice cut through the rising tempest with ducal authority. "Enough." Lady Honoria turned to him, her expression wounded, incredulous. "You would defend her against me, against the woman who maintained this household when you were too consumed by grief to function." "I am grateful," Julian said carefully, "for all you have done. But gratitude does not require surrender of conscience." "Conscience?" The Dowager's laugh was bitter, refined. "Your conscience has been remarkably silent these 3 years. Why does it suddenly speak now? And in such convenient alignment with a governess who refuses to know her place." Julian moved away from the mantelpiece, his posture straightening into the full weight of his rank. "My conscience speaks now because I have finally chosen to listen. And what it tells me, Aunt, is that this house has been governed by fear disguised as propriety." Lady Honoria's face drained of color. "You accuse me—" "I accuse no one," Julian interrupted, his tone firm but not cruel. "I state what I have observed, and I declare what must change." "Change." The word emerged as if it tasted of ashes. "You would overturn the order of this household for a woman you have known mere months? A woman whose influence over the child has already proven disruptive?" "Miss Bright is not disruptive," Clara interjected, unable to remain silent. "She is awake. And if awakeness threatens this household's order, then perhaps that order deserves disruption." Lady Honoria's eyes blazed. "You have poisoned him against me." "She has done nothing," Julian said quietly, "except demonstrate what I should have possessed all along, the courage to choose principle over convenience." The Dowager regarded her nephew with an expression Clara could not quite interpret. Fury, yes, but beneath it something older, something that might have been fear or grief, or both mingled beyond separation. "Very well, Julian." Lady Honoria's voice regained its controlled precision. "If you believe you can govern this household without my assistance, then I shall withdraw it. Entirely." She moved toward the door with glacial dignity. "But know this, when the season arrives, when society observes how you have permitted a governess to undermine established authority, when whispers begin regarding your judgment, you will find that reputation, once lost, is not easily recovered." She paused at the threshold, her final words delivered with surgical precision. "And Miss Hartwell's reputation, I assure you, will be the first casualty." She departed. The door remained open, technically proper, practically irrelevant. The damage, they all knew, had been done. Julian stood motionless, his hand pressed against his signet ring. Clara rose slowly, uncertain whether to speak or retreat into the merciful silence propriety would permit. "Your Grace," she began, her voice low. "I should not have—" "You should have." He turned to face her, and his expression carried something she had not seen before. Not quite gratitude, not quite regret, but some amalgam of both that defied easy naming. "You should have spoken. You were right to speak. And I—" He paused, struggling with words that did not come naturally to men trained in command. "I was wrong to remain silent. But Lady Honoria will retaliate." Julian stated it as fact, not fear. She will ensure that your name is connected to scandal, that invitations are withdrawn, that households are warned against employing you. Clara felt the full weight of what she had risked settling upon her shoulders. Then I have destroyed my own future. No. The Duke's voice carried unexpected steel. You have defended what was right. The destruction, if it comes, will be society's failure, not yours. Society's failures, Clara replied with weary pragmatism, do not pay rent or purchase bread. Julian moved closer, not improperly close, but near enough that she could see the exhaustion lining his features, the shadow of sleeplessness that rank could not conceal. Miss Hartwell, I cannot undo what Lady Honoria will do. But I can— He hesitated as if the words required excavation from some deep, unused place. I can ensure you are not ruined by your integrity. How, Your Grace? I do not yet know. The admission cost him. But I give you my word, before God and conscience, that I will not permit you to suffer for what I should have done myself years ago. The candles guttered. Outside, the fog had thickened to near solidity, pressing against the windows like judgment deferred but not dismissed. Clara curtsied, properly, formally, though her eyes remained on his. Thank you, Your Grace. Do not thank me yet, Miss Hartwell. We have only begun the battle. Lady Honoria does not forgive, and society does not easily abandon its prejudices. No, Your Grace, it does not. Then we shall see, Julian said quietly, whether principle can withstand the siege. Clara departed through the servants' passage, her heart beating an unsteady rhythm, her mind already calculating the cost of the night's defiance. Behind her, the Duke stood alone in the library, staring at the candle snuffer that had ended so many conversations, silenced so many truths. He lifted it once more, felt its tarnished weight, and this time, when he set it down, it was with the finality of a man abandoning old weapons for a battle that required different arms entirely. Morning arrived with frost on the windows and ice in the household's atmosphere. Clara descended to the breakfast room at 7:30, as was her custom, to collect Elsie's morning tray before lessons commenced. The usual bustle of servants paused as she entered, a silence more telling than any whisper. Mrs. Pembroke approached with the tray, her expression carefully neutral. Miss Hartwell, Miss Bright's breakfast. Thank you, Mrs. Pembroke. The housekeeper hesitated, then lowered her voice. Her ladyship has summoned the senior staff to her sitting room at 9 o'clock. It is unprecedented. Clara's stomach tightened. I see. I thought you should know, miss. I am grateful for the warning. Clara carried the tray upstairs, her mind working through probabilities, calculating defenses. Lady Honoria was moving quickly, too quickly for casual retaliation. This was strategy, deliberate and devastating. Elsie was already dressed when Clara entered the schoolroom, her honey-brown hair neatly ribboned, her expression anxious. Miss Hartwell, Cook said Lady Honoria was very angry last night. Clara set down the tray and smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from the child's pinafore. Cook should attend to her duties rather than speculate about household matters. But it is true, is it not? Elsie's grey eyes, too old, too knowing, searched Clara's face. You defended me, and now she will punish you. Elsie, listen to me carefully. Clara knelt so their eyes were level. Whatever comes today, whatever changes occur in this household, you must remember this. Choosing what is right is never a mistake, even when it costs us dearly. But what if it costs you everything? Then I will have everything that matters. Clara touched the child's cheek gently. Conscience, dear one, is the only possession no one can take from us unless we surrender it willingly. A knock interrupted them. One of the parlour-maids, young, frightened, stood at the threshold. Miss Hartwell, His Grace requests your presence in the morning room. Immediately, if you please. Clara rose, her heart steady despite the foreboding. Thank you. Tell His Grace I shall attend him directly. She turned to Elsie. Begin your arithmetic exercises. I shall return shortly. But even as she spoke, Clara wondered whether that promise could be kept. The morning room faced east, its windows admitting pale winter light that did nothing to warm the chill within. The Duke stood before the cold hearth, still in his riding clothes, as if he had been awake or sleepless since before dawn. Miss Hartwell. His voice was tight, controlled. Close the door. She did so. The click of the latch sounded unnaturally loud. Lady Honoria, Julian began without preamble, has informed the household staff that you are to be dismissed, without reference, effective immediately. Clara's breath caught, though she had expected nothing less. I see. She has also, he continued, his jaw tight with suppressed fury, suggested to the senior servants that your dismissal stems from improper conduct. With me, the words fell like stones. Clara's face paled, but her voice remained steady. Has she provided evidence of this impropriety? Last night's meeting, my summons, the late hour, the private nature of our conversation. Julian's hand clenched at his side. She has twisted truth into scandal with remarkable efficiency. Then I am ruined. Clara stated it calmly, as one might observe weather. No household will employ a governess dismissed under such circumstances. You are not ruined. The Duke's voice carried absolute conviction. Because you are not dismissed. Clara's eyes widened. Your Grace, I have countermanded Lady Honoria's instruction. You remain in my employ with my full confidence and protection. But Your Grace, if she has already spread whispers, then I shall spread truth. Julian moved closer, his expression fierce with determination. I will not permit you to be destroyed for refusing to enable cruelty. Your intentions are honorable, Your Grace, but practicality, damn practicality. The curse emerged with quiet intensity. I have been practical for 3 years, accommodating, cautious. And in that caution, I have permitted injustice to flourish under my own roof. Clara's throat tightened. You risk your own reputation by defending me. Then let it be risked. Julian's gaze held hers. I have title, land, fortune. You have integrity and courage. If society values the former over the latter, then society is more corrupted than I believed. Society does not require belief, Your Grace. It requires conformity. Then I am weary of conforming. The declaration hung between them, radical, dangerous, undeniable. Clara felt the full weight of what he offered, protection that would cost him dearly, defense that might ruin them both. Your Grace, I cannot accept. You have no choice. His tone softened, though the steel beneath remained. I have made my decision. You will remain. Lady Honoria will be informed that household decisions are mine to make, not hers. She will never forgive this defiance. No, Julian agreed quietly. She will not. But forgiveness without justice is mere capitulation wearing virtue's mask. A commotion sounded in the corridor. Raised voices, hurried footsteps. Mrs. Pembroke appeared at the door, her composure visibly shaken. Your Grace, forgive the interruption, but Lady Honoria has summoned the staff to the entrance hall. The housekeeper faltered. She is making a declaration. Julian's expression hardened. What manner of declaration? Regarding Miss Hartwell's character, Your Grace, and your judgment. Clara's heart sank. Lady Honoria was not waiting for private retaliation. She was orchestrating public humiliation before witnesses, servants who would carry tales to every household in the county. Julian straightened, his ducal authority settling upon him like armor. Then I shall address the household myself, immediately. Your Grace, perhaps, Clara began, but he silenced her with a look. No more perhaps, Miss Hartwell, no more caution. If Lady Honoria wishes confrontation before witnesses, then witnesses she shall have. He strode toward the entrance hall, Clara following at a distance that propriety demanded, but courage refused. They emerged at the top of the main staircase to find the household staff assembled below, footmen, maids, kitchen workers, stable hands, all standing in uncertain silence as Lady Honoria addressed them from the center of the marble floor. A woman who has forgotten her station, the dowager was saying, her voice carrying perfect aristocratic projection. A woman who schemes to elevate herself through improper influence. Aunt, Julian's voice cut through her speech like a blade. That is quite enough. Lady Honoria turned, her expression shifting from righteous proclamation to cold fury. Julian, this does not concern... It concerns my household, my authority, and my honor. He descended the stairs with measured deliberation, each step a declaration. And I will not permit any member of this house, regardless of rank, to slander those under my protection. The servants exchanged glances. This was unprecedented. Ducal authority exercised against the dowager. Family conflict exposed before staff. The careful hierarchy of the household suddenly, violently disrupted. Lady Honoria's face paled. You would humiliate me before servants. I would defend truth before witnesses. Julian reached the bottom of the stairs and faced his aunt directly. You have accused Miss Hartwell of impropriety. I declare before this assembly that your accusation is false. The entrance hall held its breath. 30 servants stood frozen, witnesses to something no household manual had prepared them to observe. Aristocratic authority turning upon itself, propriety weaponized. the careful architecture of Victorian social order trembling on its foundations. Lady Honoria recovered first, her composure reassembling with terrifying precision. "False," she repeated, her voice carrying wounded incredulity. "Julian, you cannot possibly expect these people to believe that a governess summoned to private meetings at night." "The meetings were proper," Julian interrupted, his tone brooking no contradiction. "Mrs. Pembroke was informed. The door remained open. Miss Hartwell's conduct has been beyond reproach." "Beyond reproach?" The dowager's laugh was bitter silk. "And yet you defend her with such passion. One might almost think there were deeper feelings involved." The implication landed like a slap. Several maids gasped. A footman's eyes widened. The stablemaster shifted uncomfortably. Clara, still at the top of the stairs, felt her world narrowing to a single point of collapse. If Lady Honoria succeeded in connecting her name to scandal, even unfounded scandal, no employment would be possible. No reference could counter the whisper of impropriety between a duke and his governess. "My feelings," Julian said quietly, each word carefully placed, "are irrelevant. What matters is fact. And the fact is this: Miss Hartwell has demonstrated more integrity in one evening than this household has shown in 3 years." Lady Honoria's expression shifted. Something cracked beneath the aristocratic mask. "You would say this before servants? You would undermine my authority, question my judgment, defend her against me before servants?" "I would speak truth," Julian replied evenly, regardless of audience. "Then you are a fool." The words emerged with cold finality. "A fool who has permitted a woman of no rank, no family, no consequence to poison you against your own blood." "She has poisoned nothing." Julian's voice carried absolute conviction. "She has merely held a mirror to what we have become, and I have found the reflection unacceptable." The dowager turned toward the assembled staff, her final appeal delivered with calculated emotion. "You see what has occurred here. A woman enters this house, and within months she has turned nephew against aunt, master against tradition, order against itself." Her gaze swept the servants' faces. "Mark this moment. Remember it. When ruin comes, and it will come, remember that I warned you all." She swept toward the main door, her pearl-grey silk catching morning light like accusations. But Julian's voice stopped her. "Aunt, if you leave this house in anger, you leave it permanently." Lady Honoria turned slowly, her expression one of genuine shock. "You would exile me, your own family?" "I would give you a choice," Julian replied, his tone softening slightly, though the steel remained. "Remain, and accept that this household will no longer be governed by intimidation. Or depart, and I shall ensure you have income and accommodation appropriate to your station, but no authority over my home." The silence stretched unbearably. Clara watched from above, her heart aching for the Duke's evident pain, her mind calculating the cost of what he offered. His aunt's permanent enmity, his household stability shattered, his own authority questioned by every servant present. Lady Honoria's face worked through a cascade of emotions: fury, disbelief, wounded pride, and finally, something that might have been grief. "You would choose her over me." "I choose principle over comfort," Julian replied quietly, "as should we all." The Dowager Duchess drew herself to her full height, aristocratic dignity reassembling despite the visible tremor in her hands. "Then I choose dignity over humiliation. I will not remain where my counsel is despised and my loyalty rewarded with insult." "That is your decision to make, aunt." "Indeed." Lady Honoria's gaze moved upward, finding Clara at the top of the stairs. The look she delivered was pure venom, refined and deadly. "Enjoy your victory, Miss Hartwell, but know this: a house divided against itself cannot stand. And when this household crumbles, when society turns from you, when whispers become judgments, when the Duke discovers that principle is a cold companion in exile, remember that you brought this ruin upon yourself." She departed. The great door closed behind her with a sound like a tomb ceiling. For a long moment, no one moved. The servants stood frozen, uncertain whether to disperse or remain, whether to acknowledge what they had witnessed or pretend blindness. Mrs. Pembroke finally cleared her throat, breaking the terrible silence. "Shall I prepare the Dowager's rooms for closure, Your Grace?" Julian seemed to age 10 years in an instant, the cost of his defiance settling visibly upon his shoulders. "Yes, Mrs. Pembroke, and arrange for her belongings to be sent to the London house within the week." "Very good, Your Grace." The housekeeper turned to the assembled staff. "Return to your duties. What has occurred here remains within these walls. I will not tolerate gossip. The servants dispersed with unusual haste, though Clara could see the glances exchanged, the whispers barely contained. By evening, every household in the county would know that the Duke of Ashmere had exiled his own aunt to defend a governess. Julian climbed the stairs slowly, each step seeming to require conscious effort. When he reached Clara, his expression was hollowed by exhaustion and something deeper, doubt perhaps, or the first recognition of what had been sacrificed. "Your Grace," Clara began, her voice low, "I am so sorry. Do not apologize." He raised a hand, forestalling her. "You have done nothing requiring apology." "But your aunt, your household's peace, was no peace at all, Miss Hartwell, merely the silence of those too frightened to speak." He met her gaze, and despite his evident weariness, his eyes held steady conviction. "What I did today was necessary. Belated, but necessary. Society will not forgive this defiance." "No," Julian agreed quietly. "It will not. But I find I care less for society's forgiveness than I once believed possible." Clara felt tears threatening, tears she could not afford, tears that would undermine the dignity she had fought to maintain. "What will you do now?" "Now?" A faint, bitter smile touched his mouth. "Now I will face the consequences of choosing integrity over convenience, and I will ensure that you do not face them alone." Before Clara could respond, a small voice interrupted from the schoolroom doorway. "Miss Hartwell?" Elsie stood clutching her arithmetic slate, her face pale, her eyes wide with the particular terror of a child who has heard raised voices and understands too much. "Is Lady Honoria truly gone?" Clara moved swiftly to the child's side, kneeling to meet her gaze. "Yes, darling, she has departed." "Because of me?" "No." Julian spoke before Clara could answer, descending to one knee so that he too was at the child's level, a duke kneeling before an 8-year-old with no family and no consequence. "Because of me, Miss Bright, because I finally remembered that a house built on fear is no house at all." Elsie looked between them. The governess who had defended her conscience, the duke who had defended them both, and something in her young face shifted. Trust, perhaps, or hope, or the fragile beginning of safety genuinely felt. "What happens now?" the child asked. Clara and Julian exchanged a glance. Two people suddenly, irrevocably responsible for navigating consequences neither had fully anticipated. "Now," Clara said quietly, "we continue, with truth, with integrity, and with each other." It was not an answer that addressed practicalities, but it was, they all sensed, the only answer that mattered. The household moved through the following days with the careful precision of soldiers navigating contested ground. Lady Honoria's absence created a void that no one quite knew how to fill, not with grief, for few mourned her departure, but with uncertainty. The servants whispered in corners, their conversations halting abruptly when Clara passed. The stablemaster avoided the Duke's eye. Even Mrs. Pembroke, loyal and pragmatic, moved through her duties with visible unease. On the third morning after the confrontation, the first consequence arrived by post. The Reverend Alcott's letter was brief, regretful and devastating in its politeness. He could no longer in good conscience call upon the household while matters of propriety remain unresolved. The vicar's wife had expressed concerns. The parish ladies had voiced questions. Perhaps, when circumstances clarified, fellowship might resume. Julian read the letter twice, standing by the morning-room window where pale December light illuminated his exhaustion. He had not slept properly since Lady Honoria's departure. Clara knew this because she too had spent nights staring at shadows, calculating costs, wondering whether integrity truly justified the ruin accumulating like winter frost. "Your Grace." She had found him there, having been summoned by a note delivered with breakfast. "You wish to speak with me?" He turned, the letter still in his hand. "The vicar has withdrawn his pastoral care." Clara's stomach tightened, though she kept her expression composed. "I see. It will not be the last withdrawal." Julian set down the letter with careful precision. "The Collingwoods have cancelled their invitation to the Christmas assembly. Lady Pemberton sent regrets regarding her New Year's musicale, and my solicitor has written to inform me that certain business associates have expressed concerns. Concerns regarding your judgment. Concerns regarding my association with a governess who has, in their estimation, exercised undue influence." He met her gaze directly. "They believe you have bewitched me." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, not embarrassment but anger at the presumption, the reduction of conscience to seduction, of principle to manipulation. "And what do you believe, Your Grace?" "I believe," Julian said quietly, "that you have reminded me what it means to possess a spine." Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. "That is not the assessment society will embrace. No. Society prefers its nobility tractable, its authority unquestioned, its household order maintained through intimidation rather than justice." He moved away from the window, his restlessness evident. "But I find I am weary of society's preferences." "Weariness, Your Grace, does not pay tradesmen or secure Miss Bright's future." "No," he agreed, "it does not, which is why I have made certain arrangements." Clara's pulse quickened. "Arrangements?" Julian withdrew a sealed document from his desk drawer and placed it before her. "This is a legal trust, established in Miss Bright's name. It provides for her education, her maintenance, and her eventual settlement should anything befall me or should circumstances require her removal from this household." Clara stared at the document, her throat tight. "Your Grace, this is necessary," he spoke over her protest. "If society succeeds in destroying my reputation, I will not permit Elsie to suffer for my choices. She will have security regardless of my fate." "And what of your fate?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What of the cost you have already paid?" Julian's expression softened, just slightly, just enough to reveal the man beneath the title. "The cost, Miss Hartwell, has been my pride, my aunt's goodwill, my standing among certain circles." He paused, his gaze holding hers. "But I have gained something I did not know I lacked." "What is that, Your Grace?" "Self-respect." The words emerged quietly, as if he were discovering their truth, even as he spoke them. "For 3 years, I have governed through fear and delegation. I have permitted cruelty to flourish because confronting it required courage I believed I no longer possessed." His hand moved unconsciously to his signet ring. "You did not bewitch me, Miss Hartwell. You merely held a mirror steady enough that I could no longer avoid my reflection." Before Clara could respond, a commotion erupted in the entrance hall below. Raised voices, urgent footsteps. Mrs. Pembroke appeared at the door, her composure badly shaken. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, but there are visitors. 3 carriages. The Marchioness of Fenwick, Lady Ashford, and Mrs. Dalton have arrived without prior notice." Julian's expression hardened. "The triumvirate of county society. They come to pass judgment. Shall I inform them you are not receiving, Your Grace?" "No." Julian straightened, his ducal authority settling into place. "Show them to the drawing room. And Mrs. Pembroke, ensure Miss Hartwell is present." The housekeeper's eyes widened. "Your Grace, surely—" "I will not meet them alone. Miss Hartwell's presence is required." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. To appear before these women, the arbiters of local reputation, the keepers of social order, was to invite public judgment. But the Duke's expression brooked no argument. "As you command, Your Grace." They descended together, Clara's hands folded before her to conceal their trembling, Julian's posture rigid with contained tension. The drawing room awaited like a tribunal. The 3 women sat arranged with tactical precision, the Marchioness of Fenwick at centre, flanked by Lady Ashford and Mrs. Dalton. All 3 wore expressions of refined concern that concealed sharper calculations. "Your Grace." The Marchioness inclined her head with perfect aristocratic courtesy. "Forgive our unannounced arrival, but matters of such delicacy require prompt attention." Julian remained standing, a subtle assertion of authority. "What matters would those be, Lady Fenwick?" "Why, the rumours, Your Grace. Surely you are aware that your household has become the subject of considerable speculation." Her gaze moved to Clara with surgical precision. "Regarding this young woman's influence." "Miss Hartwell is my employee," Julian replied evenly. "Her influence extends to Miss Bright's education, and nothing further." Lady Ashford leaned forward, her expression radiating false sympathy. "But, Your Grace, the circumstances, a governess summoned to private meetings, your aunt's sudden departure, the exile of family for the sake of hired staff. Surely you understand how such events appear to observing society." "I understand perfectly how they appear," Julian said. "I am less concerned with appearance than with truth." Mrs. Dalton's fan snapped open, a gesture of delicate aggression. "Truth, Your Grace, is what society determines it to be, and society has determined that this situation is irregular." "Then society," Julian replied quietly, "is mistaken." The Marchioness's expression cooled. "Your Grace, we come as friends, as concerned members of the community who wish to prevent further damage to your reputation and Miss Hartwell's prospects." "How considerate." Julian's tone carried faint irony. "And what remedy do you propose?" Miss Hartwell's dismissal, Lady Fenwick stated boldly, with a generous settlement, a neutral reference, and your household's immediate return to conventional order. Lady Honoria might then be persuaded to return, propriety would be restored, and this unfortunate incident could be quietly forgotten. Clara felt the trap closing. Elegant, socially sanctioned, seemingly reasonable. To refuse would confirm every suspicion. To accept would betray everything they had fought to defend. Julian moved closer to where Clara stood, a subtle but unmistakable alignment. "And if I decline this remedy?" The Marchioness's smile vanished. "Then we cannot, in good conscience, continue our association with your household. No invitations, no calls, no social intercourse of any kind." She paused, letting the threat settle. "You will be isolated, Your Grace, and Miss Hartwell will be unemployable throughout England." The clock on the mantelpiece ticked steadily, measuring the silence. Then Julian spoke, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "Then I choose isolation over injustice." The pronouncement landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through shocked silence. The Marchioness's fan stilled. Lady Ashford's mouth opened, then closed. Mrs. Dalton looked as if she had witnessed something obscene. "Your Grace," the Marchioness began, recovering her composure with visible effort, "you cannot be serious. You would sacrifice your standing, your connections, your position in society for a governess." "I sacrifice nothing," Julian replied, his tone measured but inflexible. "I merely refuse to purchase society's approval through injustice." Lady Ashford leaned forward, her voice dropping to urgent confidentiality. "But Your Grace, think of your future. A man of your rank requires a suitable marriage, political alliances, social influence. Without our favor, you will find every door closed, every family unwilling to entertain proposals, every opportunity for advancement denied. Then I shall manage with the doors that remain open." Julian's gaze moved to each woman in turn, "and I shall evaluate my opportunities by their moral worth rather than their social convenience." Mrs. Dalton's fan snapped shut with audible force. "This is madness. You permit a woman of no consequence to dictate your household's governance, exile your own family, and now propose to defy every convention of proper society." "I permit nothing," Julian interrupted, his voice hardening. "I choose. There is a difference between being influenced and being awakened. Miss Hartwell has not dictated my decisions. She has merely illuminated truths I was too cowardly to acknowledge." Clara stood motionless, her heart aching at the cost of his defense, her mind racing through consequences that multiplied with each word. If he continued this path, he would indeed be isolated, a duke without social standing, a nobleman whose rank meant nothing without the community that validated it. The Marchioness rose, her movements deliberate and final. "Then we have nothing further to discuss, Your Grace. You have made your choice. Society will make its own." She gathered her reticule and gloves with ritual precision. "Come, ladies, we have wasted quite enough time attempting to save a man who prefers ruin to reason." Lady Ashford and Mrs. Dalton rose in synchronized disapproval, but as they moved toward the door, Julian's voice stopped them. "Before you depart, Lady Fenwick, I would ask you to deliver a message to your colleagues in county society." The Marchioness paused, her expression one of cold curiosity. "What message would that be, Your Grace?" "That on Christmas Eve I will host a gathering here at Ashmere House, a modest assembly, not a ball, but a reception, and I will formally present Miss Clara Hartwell as my household's governess, whose integrity and courage have earned my complete confidence and protection." The silence that followed was absolute. Clara's breath stopped. This was beyond defense. This was public proclamation, witnessed acknowledgement, the ritual moment the Victorian world recognized as irrevocable declaration. "You would present a governess?" Mrs. Dalton's voice rose with genuine shock. "As if she were a person of consequence?" "I would present a woman of conscience," Julian replied evenly, "before witnesses who will carry word throughout the county. And I will make clear, in language society cannot misinterpret, that any insult to Miss Hartwell will be received as an insult to my house and my honor." Lady Ashford's face had gone quite pale. "Your Grace, such an action would be unprecedented. A governess formally presented acknowledges what should have been evident from the beginning," Julian finished. "That virtue deserves recognition regardless of rank, and that integrity commands respect, whether or not society finds it convenient." The Marchioness regarded him with something between horror and grudging admiration. "You understand this will confirm every rumor, validate every suspicion. Society may assume what it wishes," Julian interrupted. "I concern myself with truth, not assumption." "Then you are a fool, Your Grace." The Marchioness delivered the judgment with cold finality. "A noble fool, perhaps, but a fool nonetheless." "And, Miss Hartwell," her gaze moved to Clara with something that might have been pity, "you have destroyed your only protector's reputation for the sake of your precious principles. I hope your conscience proves adequate compensation when ruin arrives." She swept from the room, her companions following like harbingers of judgment, rendered and executed. The door closed. The drawing-room settled into heavy silence. Clara turned to Julian, her composure finally fracturing. "Your Grace, you cannot. This formal presentation, it will ruin everything you—" "It will declare truth," Julian said quietly, "before witnesses, with ritual clarity, in a manner society cannot ignore or reinterpret." "But Christmas Eve is 10 days away. You have time to reconsider." "I have reconsidered for 3 years, Miss Hartwell. I am finished reconsidering." He moved closer, his expression carrying both exhaustion and unshakable resolve. "You asked what I would do. This is my answer. I will not merely defend you privately. I will acknowledge you publicly, with full ceremony, before every family who chooses to attend, and every servant who will carry tales to those who do not." "No one will come," Clara whispered. "Society will boycott. Your reception will stand empty, a public humiliation. Then it will be an honest humiliation." Julian's hand moved to his signet ring, that unconscious gesture of gathering courage. "I have lived too long in fear of society's judgment. I would rather face empty rooms with clear conscience than filled halls built on compromise." Clara's eyes filled with tears she could no longer contain. "You risk everything for a principle." "No, Miss Hartwell." His voice softened. "I risk everything for what is right. There is a difference." Before she could respond, small footsteps approached from the corridor. Elsie appeared at the doorway, her face anxious, her hands clasped before her. "Miss Hartwell? I heard carriages departing. Were they very angry?" Clara moved swiftly to the child's side, kneeling to meet her gaze. "Yes, darling, they were very angry." "Because His Grace defended you?" "Yes." Elsie's grey eyes, too knowing, too old, moved from Clara to the Duke. "Will society punish him?" "Society will attempt to punish him," Julian replied, descending to the child's level with surprising gentleness. "But punishment only succeeds when we permit shame to accompany it. And I am no longer ashamed of choosing what is right." The child studied him gravely, then turned back to Clara. "Miss Hartwell, if His Grace is hosting a reception, shall I be permitted to attend?" The question hung in the air. Innocent, impossible, perfect. Julian answered before Clara could speak. "Miss Bright, you shall not merely attend. You shall be presented alongside Miss Hartwell as the household's ward under my protection and care." Elsie's face transformed with sudden, luminous hope. "Truly, truly, before witnesses, with all formality." Julian's gaze moved to Clara, carrying a promise that transcended words. "This household will no longer hide its conscience. We shall declare it openly, and society may judge as it sees fit." Clara felt something shift within her, not relief, for the danger remained immense, but recognition. This was the ritual moment the title had promised. Not a first waltz, but something deeper, public acknowledgement that authority built on cruelty deserved no respect, and that courage, wherever found, commanded honor. "Then," Clara said quietly, "we shall prepare for Christmas Eve." Christmas Eve arrived with snow that transformed Ashmere House into something from a winter tale: white-covered grounds, frosted windows, lamplight warm against gathering dusk. The great hall had been prepared with evergreen boughs and holly, candles arranged with careful symmetry, the air rich with pine and cinnamon. It was beautiful, proper, and, Clara feared, destined to remain empty. She stood before her mirror in the small chamber adjacent to the schoolroom, adjusting the modest silk gown Julian had commissioned, despite her protests. Deep forest green, high-necked, entirely proper, yet finer than anything she had ever worn. Mrs. Pembroke had helped arrange her chestnut hair into a simple but elegant coiffure, and now Clara stared at her reflection with something between wonder and trepidation. "You look like a lady," Elsie announced from the doorway, herself dressed in pale blue muslin that transformed her from ward into something resembling a young gentlewoman. "I look like a governess in borrowed finery," Clara corrected gently. "You look like someone His Grace wishes to honor." Elsie's perception, as always, cut through pretense to truth. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Pembroke entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Miss Hartwell, Guests are arriving. Clara's heart leapt. Guests? Truly? 12 carriages thus far, miss, and more approaching up the drive. The housekeeper's composure cracked slightly, revealing something like amazement. I confess, I did not expect. That is, given the circumstances. Who has come? Clara could hardly breathe. The Reverend Alcott and his wife, miss. Mr. and Mrs. Thornbury from the village. Several tenant families. Young Lord Ashton, Lady Ashford's eldest son, arrived alone, without his mother. Mrs. Pembroke paused, her voice dropping. And others I do not recognize, families from neighboring counties, I believe. Word of tonight's declaration has spread. Clara moved to the window overlooking the entrance courtyard. Below, carriages indeed arrived. Modest conveyances mostly, not the grand equipages of high society, but respectable vehicles carrying respectable people. She recognized several faces: the village doctor, the schoolmaster, families whose children she had encountered during walks with Elsie, and others, strangers who had traveled considerable distances for reasons Clara could not fathom. They came, she whispered. Not all of society, Mrs. Pembroke cautioned. The Marchioness and her circle remain absent, as does Lady Honoria, but those who value integrity over status, she smiled faintly. It appears there are more of them than we imagined. Julian appeared at the doorway, resplendent in formal black tailcoat, white waistcoat, and an expression that mingled determination with barely concealed nervousness. His gaze found Clara's and held. Miss Hartwell, Miss Bright, are you prepared? Clara's hand found Elsie's, squeezing gently. As prepared as conscience allows, Your Grace. Then let us proceed. They descended the main staircase together, an unconventional procession that would have scandalized traditional society, but felt in this moment absolutely right. The great hall below filled steadily with guests who turned as the Duke appeared, accompanied by a governess and a child ward, as if they were family rather than employees. The Reverend Alcott stepped forward first, his expression carrying both apology and respect. Your Grace, I must confess, I withdrew my pastoral care hastily. I have since reflected on the matter and concluded that conscience, not convention, should guide spiritual fellowship. I am grateful for your presence, Reverend, Julian replied formally, and for your reconsideration. Mr. Thornbury, the village merchant, spoke next. Your Grace, when word spread of tonight's purpose, to honor a woman for her integrity rather than her rank, my wife and I felt compelled to attend. We have observed Miss Hartwell's character during her time here. She has shown our children nothing but kindness and wisdom. As has His Grace, Mrs. Thornbury added, her voice carrying across the assembled guests. It takes courage to defend what is right when society demands otherwise. That courage deserves witness. A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Clara felt tears threatening, held them back through sheer will. Julian raised his hand, requesting silence. The hall stilled immediately, all eyes upon him. My friends, he began, his voice carrying ducal authority tempered by genuine emotion, I thank you for attending this evening. I know that your presence here carries risk. Those who came despite social pressure demonstrate courage I deeply respect. He paused, his gaze moving to Clara. Tonight I wish to make a declaration that some will find unconventional, perhaps even scandalous. But it is a declaration I cannot in good conscience withhold any longer. The guests leaned forward slightly, the tension palpable. Miss Clara Hartwell entered my household as governess to Miss Elsie Bright. In that capacity she has demonstrated integrity, courage and moral clarity that this house and its master desperately needed. Julian's hand moved unconsciously to his signet ring. When confronted with orders that violated her conscience, she refused obedience. When threatened with ruin, she chose principle, and when my own family demanded her dismissal through intimidation, she stood firm in defense of a child who possessed no defender. Several guests nodded. Elsie's hand tightened in Clara's. I confess, Julian continued, his voice dropping but losing none of its carrying power, that I initially resented her defiance. I am a duke. I am accustomed to command, to authority, to obedience without question. His gaze swept the assembled witnesses. But Miss Hartwell taught me, through her quiet refusal to compromise conscience, that true authority is earned through justice, not merely inherited through title. The Reverend Alcott murmured, Amen. Therefore, Julian declared, his voice strengthening, I stand before you as witnesses to proclaim that Miss Clara Hartwell is under my household's complete protection. Any insult to her character will be received as an insult to my house and my honor. Any attempt to undermine her reputation will be met with my full opposition." He turned to face Clara directly, his dark hazel eyes steady with conviction. "And I declare, before God and this assembly, that her integrity commands my deepest respect and gratitude." The hall erupted in spontaneous applause, not loud, not vulgar, but sustained and genuine. Clara felt her composure finally shatter, tears spilling despite every effort at control. Julian descended the final steps and offered his hand, not as master to servant, but as equal to equal, witnessed by all present. "Miss Hartwell, will you permit me the honor of this first walk through the assembly?" It was the Victorian equivalent of a first waltz, a public claiming, a formal acknowledgement that transcended employment and approached something far more significant. Clara understood the implications, understood that accepting his hand before witnesses would cement every rumor, validate every suspicion, but she also understood that some moments required courage more than caution. "Yes, Your Grace." She placed her hand in his. "I will." They walked the length of the hall together, guests parting to create a pathway, their presence witnessed and validated by every person present. It was not a ballroom redemption. It was something quieter, deeper, a household's conscience declared before those who valued truth more than convention. When they reached the drawing room's threshold, Julian turned to address the assembled guests once more. "Tonight we celebrate not merely Christmas, but the principle that virtue deserves recognition regardless of rank. I invite you all to join us in fellowship, in honesty, and in the hope that integrity might someday matter more than status." The guests responded with genuine warmth, moving forward to greet Clara with respect that made her earlier fears seem distant as fever dreams. Young Lord Ashton approached with his mother's apologies and his own admiration. The Thornburys introduced their children, who thanked Clara for her kindness during village encounters. Even strangers offered congratulations for her courage. Throughout the evening, Clara felt the weight of social judgment slowly lifting, replaced by something she had not dared hope for: genuine community built on shared values rather than rigid hierarchy. Near midnight, as guests began departing with warm farewells and promises of future calls, Julian found Clara standing before the drawing-room fire, Elsie drowsing against her shoulder. "You are exhausted," he observed quietly. "I am astonished," Clara corrected. "They came, Your Grace." "Despite everything, they came." "Not all of society," Julian cautioned, echoing Mrs. Pembroke's earlier warning. "The Marchioness's circle remains hostile. Lady Honoria will never forgive this public defiance. We are still, in many ways, isolated." "But not alone," Clara replied, her gaze moving to the hall where the last guests exchanged farewells with genuine warmth. "Isolation with integrity is bearable. Belonging through compromise would have been intolerable." Julian smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his severe features. "You have taught me that lesson well, Miss Hartwell." Elsie stirred, lifting her head drowsily. "Miss Hartwell, is it over?" "No, darling," Clara replied softly, smoothing the child's honey-brown hair. "I believe it has only just begun." And as snow continued falling beyond the frosted windows, as lamplight warmed the great hall, as the assembled witnesses departed, carrying stories of a duke who chose conscience over convention, Clara understood that they had not merely survived society's judgment. They had redefined what honor meant in a world too often governed by fear rather than truth. The brass candle snuffer remained on Julian's desk, untouched and unnecessary. Some lights, they had discovered, deserved to burn regardless of who found them inconvenient. In a world that often demands we choose between principle and security, between conscience and comfort, this story reminds us that true authority is never found in the power to command obedience, but in the courage to honor what is right, even when it costs us everything we thought we needed. Clara Hartwell possessed no title, no fortune, no social standing, yet she possessed something far more valuable: an unwavering commitment to protect the vulnerable, even when that protection endangered her own survival. The Duke of Ashmere possessed every worldly advantage, yet he discovered that without moral courage, all his rank meant nothing. Their story teaches us that soft defiance, that quiet, dignified refusal to participate in cruelty, even when disguised as duty, can be more transformative than loud rebellion. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to extinguish the light of conscience when society demands darkness. We learn too that isolation in integrity is preferable to belonging through betrayal of our deepest values. The guests who came to Ashmere House on Christmas Eve were not the powerful or the prestigious. They were those who recognized that character matters more than convention, that virtue deserves honor regardless of rank, that standing for truth is worth the cost society might exact. Perhaps most importantly, this tale reminds us that we are all, in our own ways, both Clara and Julian, sometimes the defender of conscience, sometimes the one who must be awakened to defend it. And in that awakening lies the possibility of transformation, of households, of communities, of ourselves. May we all possess the courage to listen when conscience speaks, and the strength to defend it, softly but unyieldingly, when authority demands our silence. If this story moved your heart, if Clara's courage or Julian's transformation resonated with your own experiences of choosing principle over convenience, we invite you to join our community. Subscribe to Victorian Romance, audio stories to journey with us through more tales of honor, integrity, and love that refuses to compromise conscience. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to choose between what was safe and what was right? What did Clara's soft defiance teach you about strength? We read every comment and treasure the conversations this community creates around stories that matter. Your subscription and engagement help us continue creating narratives that celebrate virtue, honor the vulnerable, and remind us all that true nobility lies not in title, but in character. From all of us at Victorian Romance, Audio Stories, thank you for sharing this journey with Clara, Julian, and Elsie. May their courage inspire your own, and may conscience always find voice, soft, unyielding, and ultimately triumphant. Until our next story, dear listeners, may you walk with integrity and sleep with clear conscience.